We just had the 5.8 live stream, and needless to say, it caught a lot of people's attention. Yeah, news stories, Nod Krai, all that good stuff, all fun, cool. But the part that caught people's eye the most was actually the addition of a new elemental reaction. The new character, Ineffa, will bring a brand new reaction to the table called Lunar-Charged, which is a secondary upgrade to electro-charged. It essentially just spawns a cloud, and any enemies affected by Hydro and Electro will get the Lunar-Charged reaction, which scales on all characters that are involved and, unlike electro-charged, can crit. And this will be the new gimmick for the upcoming Nod Krai characters. They are supposed to be adding new reactions to already in place reactions. Not a really bad idea, that sounds pretty good, but there are concerns from people about where this could be heading, and rightfully so. New features locked behind specific characters is a really dicey area. And as we've seen with mechanics like Phlogiston and Night Soul in Natlin, it's not always the best executed thing. But before we get too crazy, before we lose our minds about it, let's examine what's going on here, compare it to other things we've seen before, and then we can make a better determination of whether or not this will be good or bad, or maybe even neutral. Now, personally, this is something I think has been a long time coming. I said a long time ago after Dendro released that now that every element is in the game, they would begin looking at new ways to alter the elemental gameplay itself. It's almost a natural progression. The developers are looking for ways to drag out everything, you know? They want everyone to have a new reason to play, something fresh. I believe this is why we got no new Electro characters for the entire first year of the game. They knew that by the time they released any, we'd be starving for some. I also believe this is why they took so long to release the Dendro element as playable. They knew that by the time they released it, we'd all be starving for that final piece of the elemental circle. But after receiving our first wave of Electro characters and then the Dendro element, that's when I very first said that they were going to start tapping into reactions next. This is why we started seeing regional mechanics instead. They needed something new in each region to kind of get our interest, but they couldn't fall back on any more elements because been there, done that. They'd satisfied our thirst for new Electro characters. They'd satisfied our curiosity for the Dendro element, so here we are. And so, regional mechanics took off, but if you noticed, that's right around the time they started playing with reactions. Our Bloom specialist with Nilou, our Overload specialist with Chevrus, our Vape specialist with Mualani, our Melt and Freeze specialist with Sitlali, our Electro-Charged specialist with Auroron, and 2 freeze-based specialists with Escoffier and Skirk. It just made sense. Since there was nothing elemental left for us to see in the game, well, they started making the elements themselves the interest point. Where else could they go? But, you see, now they're at the same point. We've gotten our Melt-based and Freeze-based support with Sitlali. We've gotten our Bloom specialist with Nilou. We've gotten our Freeze specialists. We've gotten our Overload specialist. We're now at the point to where the specialists exist. And so, now they're making the next logical leap, just like they made that logical leap once they started making reaction specialists. The next logical leap being secondary reactions themselves. They've exhausted the new Electro characters, they've exhausted Dendro, they've exhausted reaction specialists, and so this is the only place they could go. But you see, it is concerning because there is one other hook they've been employing the past few years in order to try to give the players something new to latch onto, and that would be regional mechanics. The fact that the new Lunar-Charged reaction is something that will be tied to Ineffa is something players are rightfully worried about right now. And we've seen that other lovely character whose name we now know is Lauma, and she has a dendro vision. We can only guess that she's going to have some kind of dendro-based lunar reaction, and we can only guess at how OP that might be. Unlike Natlan's Night Soul mechanics and Fontaine swimming, there's no indicator that the lunar reactions will be locked to Nod Krai, and that's a good thing. In fact, as long as you have Ineffa in your party, then Lunar-Charged works. That's all it takes, she just needs to be in your party. And so, that's kind of a good thing in that respect. One of the main criticisms of Natlan's characters is that they just don't function the same outside of Natlan. The fact that this is a plug-and-play character that's just gonna work the same anywhere, that's a great move. We don't need to be locking characters in regions. That's not really what anyone wanted. I didn't want it, and I don't think many others did either. It just feels better when characters can function how they should, anywhere on the map. And so to that end, this part of Ineffa, and I'm assuming the other lunar characters as well, is a W. Let characters function universally everywhere. They should just do that. But there is another part to this conversation that people are talking about. And it's that part of the conversation that people are most worried about. And that's the fact that Lunar-Charged seems to be locked behind this character. Ineffa is the key to Lunar-Charged, and we can only assume that the other lunar characters will also be the key to their own respective lunar reactions. Or whatever it's gonna be. I'm just assuming they're all gonna be lunar reactions, considering we're going to Nod Krai, but yeah, I'm just gonna say lunar reactions. Question: is this something to worry about? The answer isn't so clear. Here's the thing, and it's a very cliche answer, but truthfully, it really just depends on how they implement it. There is 100% an absolute real reason to be concerned when you see this. But I do think people need to separate valid concerns from simply being upset that if you don't get the characters, then you don't get to play the lunar reactions. What exactly do I mean by this? What do I mean when I say valid concerns being separated from simply being upset that you don't get to play lunar reactions without the characters? Well, let me define what the valid concerns are, and then I'll explain what I mean. New reactions tied to characters opens a can of worms, it opens the floodgates, it opens Pandora's box, whatever you want to say, to gatekeeping things in the game being completable without said reaction. The moment they make a boss that can only be damaged with Lunar-Charged, or they make a shield that can only be depleted with Lunar-Charged, we're in a really bad situation. That's not a good thing. And it doesn't even have to be that it's literally needed, but even if they say make it so that a certain phase of Spiral Abyss cannot be realistically completed without using some form of lunar reaction, the entire concept is cooked. That's cooked. Yeah, that's not a good thing. They have to, and I cannot stress this enough, but they have to stay away from making this mandatory in order to do anything in the game. They cannot make it absolutely mandatory in order to kill bosses, or absolutely mandatory in order to destroy certain shields, or absolutely mandatory in order to, say, 36-star the Abyss, or get all 10 marks in the Imaginarium Theater. They cannot do that. They can't. That's absolutely the worst thing they could ever do with the new lunar reactions, because at that point, they've gone to paywalling progression. Two design philosophies must be upheld here. Design philosophy 1, whatever the lunar reaction does, the base reaction that it's based upon must be able to accomplish the same thing. Any lunar reaction that can bust down a shield, its base reaction must be able to do the same. Any lunar reaction that is required to do damage, its base reaction must be able to do the same. Lunar-Charged must be an evolution of electro-charged and not a replacement for electro-charged. I feel like Hoyoverse is at least smart enough not to do that. They really shouldn't, but it's really the other design philosophy that I'm most worried about. Remember, I said there were two. And this is the one that, yeah, they may not abide by it. The other design philosophy is the base reaction should be sufficient in all cases. Maybe a hot take here, but I think it's actually fine if they do something like, say, make an abyss where every 3 lunar-charged attacks does a shockwave of true damage or something. That's fine, that's cool, but the thing is, if you use electro-charged characters instead of Ineffa, it should still be reasonably possible to get it done. The lunar reaction should be luxury, it should be extra cushion, something that makes it feel way better and easier, but the base reaction should still feel sufficient. It should not be that if you use the lunar reaction, you're barely scraping by in the abyss with, say, 7 minutes and 12 seconds left on the clock, and if you use the base reaction, then you literally just don't stand a chance. That should never be the case. It's fine for the lunar reactions to be more powerful evolutions of their base reactions, but they should always be luxury and the base should always be the floor. They cannot make the new lunar reactions the floor and sweep the old reactions under the rug. Do you see what I'm saying here? And I'm not even saying that it should be as easy. It obviously shouldn't. There's a reason the lunar reactions are evolutions of the old reactions. But if, say, someone has a really good electro-charged team, but they just don't own Ineffa, then that team should be able to get the job done by themselves. Ineffa should just be a luxury item to make it that much easier. That all said, this is what I meant by it really just depends on how they implement it. Because if they abide by these rules, then I actually don't think it's much of a problem to lock these new reactions behind characters. Do you see why I mean that? It all hinges on them treating the new lunar reactions as superfluous luxuries and not as the new baseline power level, and certainly not as any kind of requirement for literal completion or even reasonable completion. I think they'll abide by the literal completion thing, but I'm not as confident when it comes to reasonable completion. Like I said, if Lunar-Charged, for instance, is the flavor of the month, then it needs to be letting you complete floor 12 of the Spiral Abyss with like 8 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock, you know what I mean? And then Electro-Charged, you should still be able to do it with a good, say, 7.5 minutes left or something. But it can't be that Lunar-Charged lets you finish with 7.5 minutes, and Electro-Charged, you just literally can't do it. That can't be the case. Yeah, I'm sorry, dude, it can't be the case. But as long as it's scenario 1, then I feel like we're in a different zone. Because then it's like, yes, it's a new and shiny and cool reaction and everything, but no one's entitled to it in that case. It's just a luxury, you know what I mean? In the scenario where it's literally a luxury and not the base. If they keep those design philosophies intact, then you're not being done wrong if they keep Lunar-Charged or any other lunar reaction tied to a character. In that case, that's just you seeing something shiny and new and being upset that you can't use it. And that's that's a gotcha game in that case. They're just doing gotcha stuff in that case. And to that end, I mean, it's not like we don't have stuff in the game similar to that already. Because I already know there may be people that hear that and then say, well, they're selling power behind the character, or they're making it so that this character is almost a must-have. And it's like, No, they sell component characters all the time. We mentioned some earlier, remember? Nilu with her blooms, or, Chevreuse with her overloads. I don't have this character, so I don't have the best form of the electro-charged reaction, or any other lunar reaction. Is not a real valid complaint. That part's not valid, because they've been selling best case scenario characters, so that's not a thing. Heck, not even for reactions, even just for specific elements. If you have a heavy cryo team, you might want a Shinhe. You know what I'm saying? But not owning Shinhe doesn't mean they're doing you wrong if you don't have Shinhe. Like, that means you just don't own the best in slot. So yeah, to that end, yeah, it's fine if Ineffa is Lunar-Charged and the only one who has it, and it's fine if any of the other Nod Krai characters have their own lunar-based reactions as well. If they stick to the philosophies, if they stick to those design rules, then Ineffa just becomes a glorified electro-charged best-in-slot type character. Sure, it might say Lunar-Charged or Lunar Electro-Charged, but really that's all you have to think of it as, is just a glorified electro-charged, and then it seemingly becomes a lot less exclusive sounding at that point. Just imagine it didn't say Lunar Electro-Charged, but instead it was simply written into her kit as a passive that she could let Electro-Charged crit, and that it scales off of the ones involved. You may not even be thinking about this subject in that case, because we've already seen that kind of thing when it's just written into kits. Sometimes it's even written in as constellations. Nahida C2 allows all the non-critting Dendro reactions to crit. And characters like Mizuki, her C6, if you were ever so unlucky to get it, allows swirls to crit. In Nahida's case, what if instead of it being written as it is, it said allows burning to turn into super burning, which can crit, and allows bloom and hyper bloom to turn into super bloom and super hyper bloom, which can crit? If you suddenly assign a new reaction name to it, does that really change anything? Not really. It's just glorified in that case. And that's kind of what I feel about the new Lunar Electro reaction and the other lunar reactions whenever we get them. As long as they stick to those design philosophies I mentioned, then these new lunar reactions will simply be glorified buffs that really could have just been written into the kits without all the fancy names. But it's important to understand the distinction there, because since it does have a name, that means that it's open for categorization. And since it can now be categorized in the game due to having a name, that means that it can be isolated from the base reactions and given different scenarios in which it is the only way to function. And that gets to the heart of my concern. If it was written into her kit that she lets electro-charge crit and amplifies its damage based on group scalings, but it was still just treated as electro-charged and not anything different, then there would be no categorization and it would probably fly under the radar. But it does have its own categorization. She's not just a potential best-in-slot character for the already existing reaction, such as a Escoffier or a Chevreuse. She brings a whole new category, which means it's possible it gets treated differently altogether. And so, that means that Hoyoverse definitely can break those rules.